One of the most important cases involving fire safety law took place earlier this year in 2013, involving a double fatality in North Yorkshire. It's a privilege to introduce you to David Watson, who's a senior fire officer who was in the investigation team that investigated the fire and also assisted in the prosecution. David Watson has been a fire officer for many years and has a range of experience in this area. So it's a pleasure to introduce him to you. David Watson, you are a fire officer for the North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service. How long have you been an officer?
I joined North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service in 1988, so that's 25 years that I've been in the service.
And tell us about the range of work that you've done.
Well, from attending fire incidents as an incident commander, firefighter, I'm now primarily working as a fire safety officer and a fire investigator.
And I think you were heavily involved in the case of Foster that concluded in the Crown Court in Leeds earlier in 2013. Just tell us about your involvement in that case.
That's right. On the evening of the fire, I was mobilised to attend the incident as a fire investigation officer. I was supported by another fire investigator, and we spent 4 days on site immediately following the fire. I then worked assisting the police in matters of fire safety and fire investigation, and worked with another colleague in looking at the breaches of fire safety that occurred there.
And in fact, 2 cases arose from that investigation. One, a case involving a murder allegation against the perpetrator of the fire itself, and then a separate prosecution by the fire brigade. Is it unusual that the fire services should work side by side with the police in the early stages of the investigation?
Not at all. One of the duties of the Fire and Rescue Service is to investigate any fires where they're believed to be deliberate, and we will come up with a report to say how and why a fire started and why it spread in the way that it did.
Once the evidence had been gathered by you and others in your team, how did you go about then instructing a solicitor and starting the whole process of prosecution?
Within our service, within North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, we've got very close contact with legal services. We don't have an in-house solicitor, but we do have a dedicated solicitor with North Yorkshire County Council.
And is this an area in which you do need expertise from an early stage, or is this an area that a generalist can assist with?
No, we generally, you want expert help early on, and it's that second pair of eyes, no matter how experienced you are, for somebody else to look at it from a different perspective.
So you brought in a solicitor who knew this area of law and was therefore an expert in this area. Were there any other experts that needed to be brought in?
Well, very early on as well, we knew that this was a very serious case and that it would there was a potential that it would go to a trial. We've never actually taken any of our cases to trial. We've always had guilty pleas beforehand, and mostly dealt with in the magistrates' court. So attending the Crown Court is a very different ballgame in a serious case. And so very early on again, our solicitor looked to a barrister to appoint a barrister and get advice from counsel.
What about evidence gathering and collating and making sure that you had all the necessary evidence? How large or small was that task?
Well, once we involved our experts, it becomes a much bigger task, because they will generally ask us to go and find more evidence and close loopholes off that we might not have thought about. So we will initially get an amount of evidence, whether that be records, whether we've conducted interviews, whether we've got photographic evidence, but then that list gets longer and longer and longer.
And did you have a team of other officers assisting you in that task?
It was a small team. We're a very small fire service, and basically 2 officers dealt with this.
And what sort of paperwork are we talking about in terms of lever arch files here?
I think at the end there was probably a shopping trolley full of lever arch files. There was an awful lot of paperwork, so it's important to get that organised right from the start and to know where you're going with that.
Once you've gathered the evidence, you've instructed the solicitor, and you know that other experts have been brought in, is that the end of your involvement in the case until the trial, or do you still keep a hands-on approach to your cases?
Very much a hands-on approach from the legal perspective. We're the client, so we're driving this case forward, and it's up to us to maintain that drive and assist the legal team in the matters that we're experts in, which is the fire safety, physical features of the building and where things have not been right, and perhaps discussing where we believe it fits in with the legislation. So it's very important to keep fully involved, I would say.
Now, we know that there were offers of guilty pleas and discussions between the barristers about those pleas. Presumably you weren't allowed to take part in any of those discussions and the final decision, were you?
No, we were fully involved in discussions, and our legal team wanted our input and to keep us fully involved.
And there was in fact a guilty plea, and was that a plea that you and the fire brigade were content with? Definitely.
We want to see the justice done, and if it's a guilty plea, that's the result that we were after, definitely.
The judge sentenced the defendant, Mr. Foster, to a term of imprisonment. Was that expected, and is that the norm in your sort of cases?
Not at all, no. We have attended Crown Court previously, but we've never had a custodial sentence, and I think the custodial sentence reflects the seriousness of the case and the seriousness of the failings by the landlord, and our ability to bring those forward with our legal team.
The order requires the prosecutor to identify who is the responsible person. Now, were there any difficulties in identifying the responsible person in this case?
That was one of the things that we have to do early on in the case, and it was a difficult task. In this particular case, there were 2 limited companies and 3 directors that were involved, and potentially another outside agency that we had to look at to see if they held any degree of responsibility. And without the assistance from the legal team, we might not have done that correctly, and that assistance was invaluable in helping us to establish the responsible person.
And of course the directors, the 3 directors, were all interviewed, and there was an element of them blaming each other.
That's right, yeah. We conducted interviews with the 3 directors on more than one occasion, and we used our powers under Article 27 to get further information which would help us to give us evidence as to why we thought one of the directors was the responsible person and should be held to account for the failings.
And those are powers that not many regulators have, but they're designed specifically to assist in this investigative process.
Yes, we can write to somebody and request them to send us information, and the order allows that to establish who the responsible person is.
And if they don't respond to that, that in itself becomes an offence?
That would be an offence, yes, if they didn't respond under that Article 27.
A case of this size and seriousness which results in a positive outcome, does it affect other cases or potential cases?
The way the fire service will use the result of the case is in terms of publicity and how we can send a positive message around to other landlords and property owners about what they must do to comply with fire safety regulations. There's no way we can be in every place all of the time, and so we've got to use that to encourage people in a positive way to do the right thing.
Right at the end of the case, when the judge had finished the sentencing exercise, I think 2 officers were given a special commendation by the Crown Court judge, and you were one of them.
That's right, yeah. My colleague and myself, we were awarded commendations by the judge for our efforts in representing the fire authority and the work that we did. So that's very rewarding that the judge would recognise that.
And that would have highlighted the end of a difficult but successfully concluded case for you?
Definitely, yes. It was a long process, and a lot of time and effort went into it, but it was very important that happened.